Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. We also host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern, and this week with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we have a mind-blowing discussion with the Reverend Dumisani Washington regarding his book Zionism and the Black Church, Why Standing with Israel Will Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. We follow a less traveled path down Noah's family tree. We discover the biblical mission of Africa and the bond between the children of Shem and the children of Ham. So get ready to see the Bible through a different lens. Put on a pair of shades and go down by the riverside as we explore Noah's rainbow. So thank you so much for being with us. On our Clubhouse, when you come up to the platform, we say, first of all, that you're coming up to the bimah. And then second of all, when we make you a presenter, we give you smicha. So that means that you're ordinated. So instead of Reverend, we'll call you Reb. Is that okay?
That sounds good to me. Sounds good. No problem.
So anyway, welcome to Madlik. Madlik is every week at 4 o'clock, and we do record it and post it as a podcast on Sunday. And if you listen to it and you like what you hear, feel free to share it and give us a few stars. And what we do is disruptive Torah. And what we mean by disruptive Torah is we look at the ancient text of the Torah with maybe a new lens or to see a new angle. And today I'm delighted to say that we're not only looking at it through a new lens, but we're looking at it through another lens, a lens of a pastor, a man of God, who we will learn about his mission. I heard about it on Clubhouse one evening. I was scrolling and I stumbled upon you, Reverend. And you're on a mission, and you see Judaism and you see Zionism from a whole new perspective. So I want to thank you for coming on. And I want to say that, as I told you in my email that I sent you, that, every week about Saturday, on Shabbat, or on Sunday, I start thinking about what I'm going to pick as a subject matter for the coming Madlik session. And I purchased your book maybe 2 months ago, and it was sitting by the side of my bed. And for some reason, and of course I'm sure there are no coincidences in this world, I picked it up this Shabbat. And it starts with our portion of Noach. It starts by talking about the line less traveled by us Jews of Shem's son Ham. And, I should say that nothing is written for no reason in the Bible. And when it gives you a genealogy, it's because of what comes in the future. And many of us Jews will look at the genealogy in Genesis 10 and focus on Shem. We're Semites, and that's where the name comes from. And we go down that path. And your book starts, and of course I should say that your book is called Zionism and the Black Church, Why Standing with Israel Will Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. And it begins by traveling down this path less taken of Ham. And I would like to ask you to just welcome to Madlik, but if you could begin by touching upon our portion of the week, Noach, and discussing what you see in it and maybe your mission.
Absolutely, and thank you again, Rabbi, for having me on. Yes, there are 6 chapters in Zionism in the Black Church, and the first chapter is entitled The African Biblical Tie to Israel. And so we, as I say in the book, start at the beginning, right? We start at the beginning of the scriptures. And so, as you know, between the 2 portions of Bereshi, I believe, where towards the end is when Noah's first introduced. But of course, in Noah, there's the explanation of the nations, where all the nations of the earth come from Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Jafet. And so we recognize that in the scriptures, it is said that Ham has 4 sons. And there's a couple of unique things, as you know, you read the book. that the scriptures, the law of Moses deals with, and not just Moses, but obviously you go into Psalms and some of the prophets. There's a term that's given several times in the scripture about Ham's descendants differently than either Jafet or Shem. In other words, land. The land of Ham is actually something that's in the scriptures. And I don't know what that Hebrew word is. I don't know if it's Aretz Ham. I've never looked at that part of it, Rabbi, but it talks about that, which is really interesting because there's not to my knowledge, and I've kind of looked at it for a little while, a similar rendering like the land of Jafet or land of Jafet, the land of Shem, right? Obviously the genealogy is there, right? But there's not this same thing that deals with the land and the peoples. Interesting. And we've come to know that of the four sons of Ham, Shem, which are in order, Cush, which is where obviously the Hebrew for later on Ethiopia, I believe, is a Greek word, but from that region, Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, Phut or Put, which is Libya, and then Canaan, which is Canaan, right? So those four sons are who come from Ham. But interestingly, in the scriptures, when it says land of Ham, it almost exclusively refers to Egypt and Ethiopia, what we would call today Africa, right? This region. And again, you're talking about in antiquity, these regions were much broader in size than they are today. If you look at the map today, you see Egypt as a small state and go down to the southeast, and you'll see Ethiopia, then you see Yemen, you see Kenya. Well, obviously all those states weren't there. That happened much later in modernity, is particularly after the colonial period, where those nations were carved up by a few states in Europe, and they were given certain names and everything, right? But these were regions in the Bible. And so Cush, the land of Cush, and the land of Mitzrayim, they're actually dealt with many, many times, right? After the words, obviously, Israel and Jerusalem, you have the word Ethiopia. I believe one of the Ethiopian scholars says some 54 times or something like that. The word Ethiopia actually comes up in the Bible. Obviously not as many times as Israel and Jerusalem, but more than virtually any other nation other than Egypt, right? So Egypt, as obviously we know too, Africa plays a huge role in Israel's story, right? The 430 years of slavery is in Egypt, it's in Africa, right? The Torah is received at Sinai, Africa. All these things happen in Africa. Even at some point, God tells Jeremiah during the time of the impending doom, if you will, the exile that will happen at the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. And God says to the Israelites, to the Judeans, and don't run down into Egypt. Egypt won't be able to save you. Well, why does he say that? Well, because historically, the Israelites would go to Egypt until it got safer, right? For those Christians who may be on the call, you'll know that in the New Testament, Jesus' parents take him down into Egypt because Herod is going to kill him, right? So there's this ongoing relationship between Ham and Shem that's very intertwined. Moses, his wife, or his second wife, depending on how you interpret it, some of the sages, is Ethiopian, right? She's Cushite. So you have this interchangeable thing all the time throughout the scriptures, but actually starts with the genealogy. And I'll say this one last thing, rabbis, we're opening up. This is also unfortunate, as I mentioned in the book, as you know, the misnomer of the quote-unquote curse of Ham. As we know, in the text, Ham is never cursed for what happens with Noah. It is Canaan that is cursed. And he actually says that cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be. Even though it was Ham who, however you interpret, and I've heard many of the different interpretations of, uncovered the nakedness. He saw his father naked. But somehow, for whatever reason, Noah cursed Canaan, not Ham, who is Canaan is one of Ham's sons, his fourth son. As we know, those who are listening, you may know that it is the curse of Ham, quote unquote, that has been used, sadly, unfortunately, among many other things, as a justification of the slavery of Africans, right? That somehow Africans are, quote unquote, cursed of Ham, therefore the transatlantic slave trade, the trans-Saharan slave trade, those things are somehow God prescribed these things in the Bible. The curse was making Ham black, that's why he's black. All those things that are nowhere in the text whatsoever, right? Skin color is not in the text. Slavery as a descendants of Ham, none of those things are in the text. What's in the text is that Canaan is cursed for that. And so we start there, Rabbi, and from there trying to walk out this whole Israel-Africa thing.
Go ahead, Adam.
Wow, thank you so much. I just want to clarify in terms of color. I think that's a very interesting thing. It's very possible that in the biblical period, everybody was dark.
Yes, sir. I mentioned that in the book as well, but yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I'm
yes,
sorry,
sir.
I didn't see that in your book, but I mean,
No.
That's important, because
yes,
a lot of people are caught up in this color thing,
yes,
and that there's a distinction. We don't know it for sure, but
yes,
it makes sense that everybody was dark in those periods, so that the difference in color was not significant. So when Moses marries goes to Ethiopia and
right.
maybe is king of Ethiopia and marries an Ethiopian,
right.
the idea is that he marries a foreigner. The fact that she's darker may or may not have been true.
Yes, absolutely. No, thank you, Rabbi. And I touch on that as well. We say in this modern term, even in my book, I use the term Christians of color. And I don't usually use those terms just when I'm speaking. I did it that way in the title so that it would be presented in a way that is going to deal with might be some provocative things, but hopefully the people that they read it, they'll see what I mean by that. And if you're talking about the Israelite people, the Hebrew people, they are what I call an Afro-Asiatic people. Israel is still at the point of where those two continents meet, right? Southwest Asia, Northeast Africa.
Right.
I mean, it's landlocked with Egypt. I tell people, God opened up the Red Sea because he wanted to, right? He's God, he's big and bad, he can do what he wants to do, but you can literally, I wouldn't recommend it, obviously, but you could literally walk from Egypt to Israel, and you always have been able to for thousands of years. That has always been the case. And so you have a people that in terms of skin tone or whatever, yes, absolutely, they would be what we would call today, quote unquote, people of color, right? And so unfortunately, particularly in our country, we all know race and colorism is such a huge topic, and it's often so divisive, and it's used in so many different ways. And we know much of that goes back to whether slavery, Jim Crow, people being assigned worth, obviously based on how dark or light they are, and all of those things. But the problem, as you all know, is that those things aren't in the Bible, right? There's no God likes this person, doesn't like this person's dark, this person's light, that type of thing. But again, that's what men do. We as fallen creatures, we read what we want to read into the text, and then we use it, unfortunately, in a way that's not helpful. Let me just say and pause here. I can tell you that as a Christian pastor, over the years of my just delving into what we often call the Jewish roots of our faith, right? Studying Torah with rabbis and with other Jewish scholars, my faith has been more important to me than ever, in that it gives me to understand, helps me understand even more so, right? What is the Hebrew in this word here? What do the sages say about that? That's been a fascinating journey for me over the last 30 some odd years since I've been doing this particular work.
So I just want to jump in. You said so many things, but there is in this verse that we are reading today the word Ashkenaz. He was one of the children of Shem. And you quote an Ethiopian rabbi named Ephraim Isaac. And this is a sample of some of the humor in your book, or the sense of discovery. And somebody said to him, "You don't look Jewish." And he said, Ethiopia is mentioned in the Bible over 50 times, but Poland not once. And I thought that was a great line. And what it really talks to is our preconceptions. And your book and your vision and your mission breaks preconceptions of what it is to be a Jew, what the mission of a Jew is, but most important, what the relationship is between the Jewish people and the African people. And one of the things that you touched upon was this sense of Mitzrayim and Cush. And in your book, you really talk about how many times they're interchangeable, because really it is the same area. And those of us who think about Mitzrayim or Egypt, we focus on the Exodus story. We focus on the Pharaoh story. But as you mentioned, the prophets later on were having to talk to the Jews about not going back, because ultimately the experience in Egypt was always favorable. It was our neighbor and it was our place of refuge. Abraham goes down there with Sarah twice. Jacob sends his kids down there during a time of famine. The relationship and the reference to Ham and to Mitzrayim and to Cush is a very positive one. And yes, it does say in our week's parsha, of all of the children, it says ba'aratzatam b'goyehem, that they have a special language, and they have a family, and they have a land. So the fact that we are neighbors is so important in the biblical context. So I said we were going to walk down this wonderful path, and I would love for a second to talk about your mission, about reuniting our two peoples, and some of the challenges that you have. Not clearly, you don't speak to groups like us very much. Although I think, and I'm going to have an opportunity later to say that I think you should, because there's so much that we can learn. But what is your mission? How did you discover it? And what are your challenges?
Well, I'll do it concise, just because I don't want to take up too much time for us to touch as much as we can. But our mission, I am the founder and CEO of an organization called the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. I started in 2013, but for about nearly 7 years, I was not as active. I started it. I did a lot of touring and a lot of speaking throughout the United States, churches, sometimes synagogues as well. And with this mission, it was a mission that was really placed in my heart. Actually, in 2012, my first trip to Israel, I went as a guest of Christians United for Israel. I was not on staff. I would come later on to join the staff with Kufi, but I was a guest pastor. I knew some friends who were part of the organization, and the short version of that story was my first trip ever. I'm in Israel. I'm at the Western Wall at the Kotel, and I have a very intense experience in which I feel, although Africa and Israel were passions of mine already, but the fusing of those two things together and a real work in which we continue to strengthen the alliance between Israel and Africa, and then obviously in the States and the Black and Jewish community. I left there, finished the first edition of the book. Now what you have there, Rabbi, is the second edition. And we started this organization for that very purpose, to do both of those things, continue to strengthen the Black-Jewish relationship and also the Israel-Africa alliance. And so the challenges have been probably more than any other thing, disinformation, right? There's a lot of false information that's there when it comes to those things that would seek to divide and separate. When you're talking about whether Africa, Israel, now we're talking about the modern state of Israel, obviously the rebirth of Israel in 1948, Israel's close ties with African nations throughout the continent, starting especially with Golda Meir, the foreign minister, all the way up into the 70s, where you have, as I mentioned in the book, Israel has more embassies throughout Africa than any other nation other than the United States. African economies, some of them are thriving a great deal. You have a lot of synergy between the African nations and Israel. And after the Yom Kippur War in 1973, like never before, Israel's enemies target that relationship between Israel and its African neighbors for different reasons. One of those is voting in the United Nations, right? And that became very much of a challenge. So one of the greatest challenges is information. That what we share in the book and what we do in our organization, we teach what we call in our organization authentic history. It's really just simply telling what happened. How did something, whether we're talking about biblically, like we're discussing the parasha, or we're talking about historically, right? We're talking about what the relationship was and is, why those connections there. And I'll just give one quick example. If you're talking about Black-Jewish synergy in the United States, not just Dr. King's relationship with Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel in the civil rights community, not that it happened, right? But why? What was that synergy about, right? So we delve into that. We share from the documents from the Rabbinical Assembly, the Dr. King's most famous words regarding Israel that were recorded 10 days before he was killed, right? Why? And as a pastor, what we call a prophetic moment, why 10 days before he's taken from us is he telling the Black community in the world to stand with Israel with all of our might and protect its right to exist, right? Why is he saying these things? What's so important about that? And even a generation before, why was it a Black and Jewish man who changed the trajectory of this nation? Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald, millions of now first and second generation free slaves, right, but who had no access to education, not in a broader sense, and why that synergy saw some 5,400 rows and walled schools built throughout the segregated South. Why was it that? So there we touch on those historical points, and we delve into why that Black Jewish synergy has been so powerful for so many people for so long. So that is our mission, to strengthen those ties, because we believe that there's a great future ahead.
You know, and the book is full of so many, you did such amazing research. I mean, I can tell you, I never knew that Herzl said about Africa that once I have witnessed the redemption of Israel, my people, I wish to assist in the redemption of the Africans. And that is taking a small quote out of a full paragraph where the histories of the two people are so similar. I mean, it comes at us as a pleasant surprise, these synergies, but it shouldn't, because both our peoples have really traversed and continue to traverse the same pathway. And, you know, you quote Marcus Garvey and even Malcolm X and William Du Bois, who talk about, Malcolm X says, Pan-Africanism will do for the people of African descent all over the world the same that Zionism has done for Jews all over the world. There was a sincere admiration for this miracle of a people returning to its land. We were talking before you came on about this whole kind of image of an ark, and it reminds you of Odysseus, and it reminds you of all of these stories of man going on this heroic journey to find their roots, to come back, gain experience, and come back to their homeland, to their Aretz. And it's just, on the one hand, your job should be very simple, but we've driven, I guess, like any other fights, the closer you are, the bigger the friction can be. And there's nothing bigger than the friction between brothers. But it's such a challenge to address, as you say, the misinformation.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And this is, again, why that's our primary goal. And then as part of what our mission is, we have launched here just recently an initiative called the Peace Initiative. And PEACE is an acronym for Plan for Education, Advocacy, and Community Engagement, in which we, short version of that, again, we recruit young Black American and African young people from certain cities throughout the United States. A group of them, they go through a 16-week study course, having some of the same conversations we're having now, including the modern state of Israel, ancient Israel, the United Nations, all of these things that intersect when it comes to Black-Jewish relations. Then they will travel to Israel for about 10 days and return to the cities from where they've been recruited and be the hub of Black-Jewish synergy in their communities. We believe with our organization that one of the reasons for the synergy that we've seen in the past, whether it was at the turn of the century with Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald, or in the mid part of the century with Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel, right now we are in different challenges. There are challenges that face particularly the more vulnerable Black communities, and we see that synergy could really address so many issues, whether it's education, whether it's jobs, those types of things. They can really be addressed in a very holistic way, and really harnessing that synergy between the Black and the Jewish community. And this is what we are doing, an Israel advocacy that is also rooted in these communities in a way. And it's amazing. We see it already still. Rabbis and Black pastors are working together all over the country still. That continues to happen. But we want to highlight those things even more and go even further in meeting some of the challenges. And our, what we call IPSI ambassadors, will be leading that in different cities across the country.
That's amazing. Yeah, I want to come back to this sense of self-discovery and pride. And we always talk about it from our own perspective. So if you're African American, you want to make sure that your children believe that Black is beautiful, that they come from an amazing heritage, to be proud of who they are. And if you're Jewish, you want the same thing. But it seems to me, and you kind of cage the question in this way, why standing with Israel will be a defining issue for Christians of color. When we, as Jews, can see ourselves in the Black community, as we did during the Civil Rights Movement, that redeems us and that empowers us. And I think what you're saying, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but the same thing works in reverse. That in a sense, when the African community can recognize in Israel its own story, it also can find a part of itself. Is there any truth there?
I believe so, Rabbi. I believe that that's exactly, as a matter of fact, what we saw was the synergy. So let me use the example, go back to the early 1900s with Booker T. Washington, Julius Rosenwald. The way that story happens, as you may know, is that Booker T. Washington writes his seminal book, Up from Slavery. Julius Rosenwald, he lives in Chicago at the time, very active in his community. As a matter of fact, he was active using his wealth. Those of you who don't know of Sears Roebuck fame, he's the one who took Sears Roebuck to this whole different level economically and everything. And so with his wealth as a businessman, he's helping the Jews who are being persecuted in Russia. And one of his own testimonies, I don't say this part in the book, but I kind of alluded to it, that here he is driving to work from the suburbs to where his factory is, where his store is, and he's passing by throngs of black people who've left the South, right, looking for a better life, but they're living in very, very bad conditions, a lot of poverty and everything. And he says to himself, basically, if I'm going to do all of this to help Russian Jews, right, way over there on the other side of the world, and I have this human crisis right here where I live, I want to be able to do that. And his rabbi, I almost said pastor, his rabbi was Emil Hirsch, one of the founding members of the NAACP, right? So his rabbi encourages him, and we see this with our Jewish brothers and sisters all the time. See yourself, do help, use your wealth, use your ability, right, to help. And so he reads Booker T. Washington's book. He's taken with him. They begin to correspond. And Booker T. Washington says, here's how you can help me. I'm trying to build schools for my people who don't have access. And Rabbi, to your point, here is this man, this Jewish man, who's very well aware of his history. He knows his people's history of persecution and struggle and triumph, right? Very much sees himself in that black story, and then he uses his ability. It's amazing, even what he does. There's a Rosenwald film about Rosenwald schools. I believe his children were the ones who produced it. And they were saying that what he actually did was pretty ingenious. He put up a third of the money. The black community raised a third of the money, and then he challenged the broader white community to partner with them and bring the last third. And that is how those Rosenwald, because what he wanted to do, he wanted to see people come together. He wanted to see them all work together. And that venture, even though Booker T. Washington passes away only 3 years into that, right, that venture continues on. Julius Rosenwald goes and sits on the board of the Tuskegee College, Tuskegee University, right? There's this long connection that's there. So in that struggle of the black American community, and he connected with this black American leader, one of the most prominent of the time, Booker T. Washington, and they, like I tell people, changed the world. Like, can we imagine what the United States would have been if you had those millions of now freed slaves, right, with no access, particularly those who are living in the Jim Crow South, no access whatsoever to education? What would the Harlem Renaissance have become what it had become? Would the Black Wall Street, whether it's in Tulsa, whether it's in Philadelphia, these things that explode because of the access to education to now these first and second generations of people coming out of slavery, right? So I believe that that's the case, and which is why I'll say again here today, some of those challenges are there. Some of the challenges are different than they were obviously 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. But we believe in our organization that those challenges can be met with that same amazing synergy between the black and the Jewish community.
A lot of people would argue that the rift or the change of the relationship between the African American community and the Jewish community was when the Jews or Israel stopped being looked at as the David in the Goliath story, and we won the 6-Day War. And how do you ensure that the facts are told, but also that we are, if you, as you climb out of the pit and as you get and achieve your goals, you shouldn't be necessarily punished for being successful. Success is not a sin. It's an inspiration. But it seems to me that's one of the challenges that we have, especially in the Jewish community, for our next generation of children who really do see ourselves not as the minority and don't see ourselves anymore mirrored in the African American community.
one of my favorite things about the Jewish tradition of the Seder is that you all lean and recline in the Seder today, and you tell your children, when we had the first one, we sat with our sandals on, our staff in our hand, our belts around, because we were slaves leaving slavery, but now we are no longer. And that's that whole ethos of telling children, right? There's a strong parallel in the Black American community, right? The whole point of going from struggle to a place where you can live in peace, or at the very least you recognize and realize the sacrifice of the people who came before you, right? And I won't step into the controversial for lots of different reasons. We won't be able to unpack it, but let me just say this. For the Black American experience, when you're talking, I often teach this in our sermons and other things, that arc, and let me say again, no people are monolith. Obviously, we just kind of put that on the table. All the Jews aren't alike, all Black Americans aren't alike, and all that. But having said that, there is an overarching story when you talk about Black Americans who, from slavery through Jim Crow, segregation, black codes, all of those types of things, to the modern era. And much of that story, I should say, that story cannot accurately be told without talking about God and his people. In other words, when you're talking about the spirituals, go down Moses, Joshua at the Battle of Jericho, and I talk about that in the book. These songs that are rooted in the scriptures, most of the time in the Tanakh, our Jewish brothers and sisters side of the Bible. It means sometimes in the New Testament, most of the time, these songs are being sung in hope, and that hope was realized, right? I even ended by it's not a Negro spiritual technically, but I put it in that category, part of the greatest one ever. I mean, how it culminates would be Lift Every Voice and Sing, a song that today has all these political things connected to it for lots of different unfortunate reasons. But when James Weldon Johnson wrote that song, wrote a poem, it wasn't a poem, a song, he wrote it as a poem. Those stanzas, and anybody listening to this, I want to challenge, Google it. Google Lift Every Voice and Sing. Read all three of them, right? Just read the words for themselves. Very powerful, very, very much God and God's love for, and our hope and our faith and our trust and our honoring the people who came before us, all of those things. And he talked about being free. Now, it's written in 1899, right? You still have crushing. I mean, there are no laws against lynching that are going on. It's still crushing racism. However, he, as a father in the Black community, is not only acknowledging what God has done, there's amazing things that are happening. One of the economists that I quote in my book, Thomas Sowell, said that the Black community, after slavery, and less than 50 years after slavery, went from 0% literacy to almost 50% literacy in that half a century, something economic historians say has never happened before. And now you're talking about the Black Wall Street. You're talking about Black oil barons and landowners and factory workers and factory owners, right? You're talking about this Black middle class is emerging. There's been no civil rights bill, right? There's been no Pell Grants for school. These things don't even exist yet. We're talking about the 19-teens, the 1920s. You're talking about Black people who had previously been slaves for hundreds of years. Why am I saying all that? We, as a people, know full well, if we know our history, know full well what it is to come from all of those dire situations into a place of blessing, even though there may be struggles, just like our Jewish brothers and sisters. We are convinced in our organization that as we know, as the Black community, particularly our younger people that we are talking with and teaching, as we know and appreciate our history, not the history that's regurgitated in terms of media and for political purposes, but truly our history, then there is a great deal to be proud of about that. And to see, as I said in a sermon a couple of months ago, not only does it not a victim narrative, I descended from superheroes. My people went through slavery, Jim Crow, and still built Wall Street, still built the Tuskegee Institute, still were soldiers who fought for their own freedom in the Civil War. I mean, you're talking on and on and on, things that they should have never been able to accomplish. When I consider what they accomplished with not very much help often, I recognize the greatness of the heritage that I come from. Then that allows me to see an Israel rise like a phoenix from the ashes and not spurn that, but recognize that our Jewish brothers and sisters have gone through millennia of this, and Israel then is to be celebrated, not denigrated.
Rev, we want to thank you. Your passion and your insight has really brought kind of a new insight to our discussion here. We really want to thank you. You know, we at Madlik, we start on time and we end on time. Shabbat is about to begin in just a little while.
Yes.
So I think that we want to, hopefully we'll be able to invite you back in the future and to continue this conversation. But I know I join Geoffrey and everybody on the call and everybody who's going to listen to the podcast. Thank you for joining us and for really your insight and your passion. You really leave us with so much to think about as we begin the Shabbat.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for having me.
Thank
you, Geoffrey. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom. And Reb Dumisani, I just want to share with you, you mentioned the songs. There's a whole chapter in your book about Negro spirituals. And as the rabbi said, we are approaching the Shabbat. And as you observe Sunday, we observe Saturday. But you know that the secret of living without a land or being on a difficult mission is that Sabbath, the strength of the Sabbath. And the connection between Noach and the word menucha, which is rest, is obvious. And there was a great poet named Yehuda Halevi, and he wrote a poem about the Yonah, the dove that Noah sent out of the ark to see if there was dry land. And he said that on Shabbat he said, Yom Shabbaton ein lishkoach, the day of Shabbos you cannot forget. Zechu l'kriach hanichoach. He also uses reach nichoach, which is a pleasing scent. Yonah matzah bo menoach. The Yonah, the dove, found on it rest. V'sham yanuchu yegiei koach. And there, in the Shabbat, in that ark of rest, on that ark of Sunday or Saturday, is where we all gain strength. So I wish you continued success in all that you do, and that this Shabbat and this Sunday we all gather the strength to continue our mission. But I really do hope that we get another chance to study Torah together. And I really hope that all of the listeners go out and buy your book, Zionism and the Black Church, because it is an absolute thrill. And I understand you're coming out with a new book that's going to talk more about the Jewish people and the various colors and flavors that we come in.
Absolutely. Hopefully put that out next year sometime, Rabbi. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Shabbat shalom. And we are in your debt.
Thank you, Rabbi. Looking forward to it. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing the song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers died. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy mud led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow